Welcome to the October 20th Arborist call. Same kind of agenda we always follow, brief welcome, an intro, we do node updates from Zcashd and Zcashd, and then we have a period of kind of open discussion. Today we wanted to talk about ZIP 317 a bit, and then we have, we should have plenty of time for just open discussion around any topics that anyone wants to bring up and discuss. And questions and comments are just encouraged throughout. We try to keep these pretty casual and and informative, but we want to make them interactive too. So you definitely don't have to wait at the end to ask any questions or raise your hand or anything. Arborist calls, if you happen to be watching this on YouTube and you're not familiar with it, it's where we talk about protocol development or things related to protocol development. That could be design, implementation, blockers, new protocol features, etc. The goal is to kind of make it more accessible to people and more transparent, so people can have kind of a checkpoint of what's going on at the protocol level. Periodically, we do these every 2 weeks. Anybody can participate. You obviously can register and attend. You can catch it on YouTube. You're welcome to present. If it's something about the protocol, you can just reach out to me. Or you could just say, hey, it would be great if you all would discuss a certain topic whenever you can work it in. We're happy to do that as well. So just reach out to me and let me know. Other ways to get involved, we've got a phenomenal community grants program that's really going well. We've got a lot of great projects that have been funded through there. We also have a partnership we did with Filecoin, the Filecoin Foundation, I should say, and ECC. We set up a grant program. That's the website there, ff-ecc-grants.org. We've already got one grant that we've approved through there, and we're looking for others. So if there's anything you can think of that would benefit both Filecoin and Zcash, feel free. And we've got a lot of latitude with what we can fund under there. So, and then of course we have the main way we stay synced up in between Arborist calls is through the Zcash R&D Discord. And we talk about not just protocol there, but any and all things Zcash, wallet development, cryptography, protocol, of course, node specific kind of things, common implementation efforts where we're kind of working on the same thing at the same time. But that's where basically all things related to development we discuss async there. And with that, I'll turn it over to someone from the foundation to give us an update on ZBD.
Yeah, that's me today. Hi, I'm Teal. So we have exciting news. Zebra has tagged its first release candidate, which means that we're pretty happy with the consensus rules, syncing the chain, and the Light Wallet D RPCs. And we're looking to get it audited over the next few months, hopefully. So that's where we're at with Zebra. In this particular release, we made some significant performance improvements to the Light Wallet D RPCs, making Light Wallet D syncing about twice as fast, and also letting all of the RPCs run in parallel with blocks being committed to the state. So anybody who uses Zebra's RPC should see some performance improvements there. One, I guess, kind of a breaking change in this release is that Rust released a new compiler version with a regression, performance regression in Zebra's parameter download code. So for new users, that might mean that if you build with Rust 1.64 or later, your downloads, the parameter download will time out. Old users are fine, and anybody who uses Rust 1.63 or earlier should be fine. So we've got a workaround on our side of using Rust 1.63 or using the download script from the Zcashd repository to download the parameters. So you can check out the README for those details. Those are the big changes in this release, and credit to the entire Zebra team, including a bunch of people who are no longer with the foundation, for getting us to this stage. If you want to try Zebra out, we are the Zebra project on Docker Hub, and I'll just paste the link to the Docker Hub releases in the Zoom chat, and also the link to the release notes. So yeah, go launch our Docker image, see how it goes. It'll just sync for now. We didn't want to turn the RPCs on by default because that might be a security issue to have them running unexpectedly. But you should be able to turn those on by changing the config in the Docker image. So that's where we're up to. Any questions about that? We've had some questions from users already on our Discord and on the R&D Discord.
No questions from me, but I'd just like to say huge congratulations. I know it's been a ton of great work. All right. Can y'all still hear me, by the way?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I clicked on the wrong tab. Actually,
I might have heard a bird, but we definitely can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think the bird was me, but or at my house, but yeah, I accidentally clicked on the Docker Hub link.
Or someone was asking the question and it was really muffled. That is also a possibility, but the audio sounded like a bird.
Got you. Oh, I guess it could have been that. Yeah. All right. Very good. But I was saying, if you didn't hear me, huge congratulations to everyone that's worked on Zebra, over time. As Taylor indicated, some people that worked on it really hard and not with Foundation currently, but great work by those folks as well as the current engineers at the Foundation. It's been a big effort and a lot of great work. All right, moving forward to Zcashd. I got a couple slides I put together here. So the focus for us has been for some period of time making some changes to lessen the impact of the increased shielded load that we're seeing on the chain. We've put out a couple of Zcashd releases already, 5.10, 5.20. We're releasing 5.30 today. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. With some of the specifics in there. The gist of 5.30 is it's largely focused on improving concurrent memory utilization during scanning, or full node sync, whatever you want to call it, so that we don't max out and potentially run out of memory when that sync is occurring. So we've made a number of optimizations there to improve that, and we're pretty pleased with that. There's a couple of other optimizations we're looking at, one memory related, one performance, and we'll get those rolled into it may be a Zcashd 5.3.1 or it could be 5.4.0, just kind of depends on the timing, but we'll get that out as quick as we could. But we wanted to get the memory optimizations out in the field as soon as possible. We're also working on recursion in Halo 2 and on 3 parallel tracks, as I mentioned before. That's kind of a long-running project. The front-end API, back-end split accumulation, and circuit changes for full width scalar multiplication. And we've been and have continued to do work on ZIP 317. I mentioned that on last Arborist call, and quite literally as soon as that call, or actually as that call was ongoing, we kind of thought of an edge case that we didn't account for. And I've got a slide that talks about that, kind of the parameter selection for that coming up. We'll just kind of go back over that one more time so that everyone's kind of on the same page. And one thing I kind of jumped over there, on the mobile SDKs, we put out the releases for the node. We feel pretty good about that. We've still, again, got some optimizations that we'll be rolling out. But for wallets built on our SDK, which is Nighthawk, of course, Addie's on the call, the Edge wallet and Unstoppable wallet, we need to get a faster sync solution in place in those SDKs. That's been our priority really ever since we put out 5.2.0 for the most part of Zcashd, because that involves the core team and the wallet team working on those SDK releases. Primarily on the core side, Chris and Strad have been doing great work there, along with Popular Carter and the wallet folks. Our tentative timeline is that on the iOS side, we'll have an alpha ready next week for internal testing. And then the Android should follow roughly by about a week or so, something like that. So we're getting pretty close to the first phase. We'll roll that out, as I mentioned, in a couple of releases. The first one is massive in terms of the updates that occurred. So we wanted to split it up and do it kind of piecemeal. It also adds support to the SDKs for unified addresses. So, all right. In terms of Zcashd 5.3.0 specifically, this is essentially a copy of the release notes. But 5.2.0 improved the performance of wallet scanning with multi-threaded batch trial decryption of sapling outputs. But that also kind of resulted, there's more work going on in parallel, essentially, kind of the high-level version. That resulted in more memory usage. And depending on your node and your wallet, you could hit an LOM situation. So we isolated that. We made a lot of improvements around memory usage in the batch scanner, and now we kind of cap it. So we detect it and cap it and operate within that cap. So we avoid the LOM problems. We also have added new metrics, Prometheus metrics. So you can see those, and that just gives you an idea of progress of the batch scanner, and as well as the, how far the node has synced the block height. On the RPC interface, final orchard root field and get plot result, and the final root field and get tree state have been changed to match by ordering. That was just kind of something we discovered. Yeah, and that's kind of essentially the updates. Again, as I mentioned, the bulk of the updates for 5.3.0 around memory optimizations for the most part. Okay, move forward. Zip 317. Here's kind of the parameter selection that we're kind of have settled on, and I'll explain. We have Chris, who this is kind of a text straight out of a HackMD that he put together, so we kind of analyze this. So we definitely have the expert on the call, but I'll kind of walk you through kind of the high level intent. So the intent is to make fees paid per transaction, as the name of the zip implies, kind of proportional to your usage of the chain. Like how much are you using the chain in terms of space with any given transaction? So, the team came up with a concept of like logical actions. Now, actions is an orchard term specifically, because in orchard, sprout, there's join splits. In sapling, there's inputs and outputs. But in orchard, there's just actions. So it's, you can't really tell, is that an input? So, 10 actions could be 5 inputs, 5 outputs, or 1 input and 9 outputs. But it's a little obfuscated for privacy there in that sense. So logical actions is just a term we came up with to kind of have a common term that applied across all the pools. So basically what we wanted to come up with was a way to kind of make it fair regardless of which pool you're in, and not having a preference, not creating an economic incentive to use one pool over the other per se, but to just make usage of the chain equitable across pool regardless of what you're doing. So for the case of Sprout, we'll come back to transparent. In the case of Sprout, you have join splits. So 2 times the number of join splits. For sapling, the max of inputs or outputs on a transaction. And then again, orchard actions is kind of a logical thing as well. And then on the transparent side, right? Well, you have inputs, you have VINs and VOUTs essentially for UTXOs or for transparent. But what that did account for was sometimes transparent transactions can be rather large, even though they have a small number of inputs and outputs. And what we wanted to do, and this is kind of the change from last Arborist call when we discussed this, was we wanted to account for, if you do have a large transaction, a large transparent transaction, even though it may have a small number of inputs and outputs, we wanted to factor in and create kind of a logical action for transparent. So it's essentially taking the standard input size for a transparent transaction as the divisor, and then the dividend being the actual number of input bytes, and ditto on the output side. Output bytes divided by the standard output byte. So you kind of wind up with a logical representation of usage of the chain by that transparent transaction. So the net of all this is, the the fee comes out to be something that we feel is kind of, fair and equitable, regardless of the pool you're using, and it's based on how much you use the chain. So I know that's a lot. I know this is a super busy slide. I do have some examples of what this looks like in practice, but before I move on, I just want to kind of pause and see if there are any questions or anyone has any comments so far. Addie.
So great to see so many iterations of the parameter selection. Looking at the logical actions for the sapling portion, I see a max of either sapling inputs or outputs. So what was the thinking behind this?
Say that again.
So for the sapling portion, we are considering the max of inputs or outputs. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I can. So we wanted to make sure that there was not an economic reason to use sapling instead of orchard. And in orchard, it's non-discretionary. You have as many inputs as you have outputs or vice versa. And so by taking the max of the sapling inputs and sapling outputs, it essentially means that you are paying the same per input or output price as you are paying for using orchard. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yep. So Stephen also mentioned the edge case that was found. I mean, even I had discussed with Dara and we found an edge case, but that was in the enforcement portion. So was that the same edge case or another one?
No, the last Arborist call, we didn't like we weren't taking into account the potential size of a transparent transaction. We were just, like looking at the number of transparent inputs and outputs, similar to kind of how we were doing sapling. And then we realized, well, you can have a low number of transparent inputs and outputs, but a very large transparent transaction, right? And we just wanted to make sure that, okay, if you happen to have one of those very large transactions, you're kind of paying the equivalent if you had the same number of transparent inputs and outputs that created that same amount of chain usage. So that was kind of the case we discovered after the last Arborist call, if that makes sense.
With transparent scripts, you can include really an arbitrary amount of data in a transparent script. And this basically says, just like with sprout and sapling, we are going to use the size of the transparent script as our proxy for how much, what the number of economic actions that you are trying to make. And so if you have, a 2 input, 2 output transparent transaction, you will be paying the same as a 2 input, 2 output sapling or orchard transaction. And that's assuming a standard P2PKH transaction. If you have, a multi-sig or something like that, you might end up paying, approximately 1 action per signature that's required or something like that.
Understood. That's pretty smart. So I guess my concern was about enforcement of this fee, and that's where there's another edge cases where the spamming can still continue. So what are the plans around the enforcement? Is this going to be a hard fork upgrade or a soft fork?
No. So the next step, like obviously, if if someone says, oh, what about this edge case, then we kind of revisit it or whatever, but we feel pretty good about this. So the next steps, and Nate couldn't join us today. Nate's kind of been on point on our side for getting comfortable with the actual parameters. And it's also another reason why I'll just kind of segue for a moment that, you have to be incredibly careful with anything related to economics. And that's why we've like really scrutinized potential fee changes so that we thought about it from a lot of angles to try to identify any potential edge cases or holes, if you will, in the implementation. So next steps, Addie, and we can definitely use your help on this, I think Nate may have emailed you, but that may not be the best way to contact you. We want to get, kind of the wallet developers, if you will, together from the community, like yourself and, Zach Wallet, Y Wallet, Edge Unstoppable, and just kind of go over some of this to make sure everyone's kind of, I know you have a great understanding, obviously, because you talk with folks at ZCon3, Chris and Dara, and then authored the zip and have been iterating on that. So you're super familiar with it. I want to make sure that all the other wallet devs are, up to speed too, and have an opportunity to kind of weigh in, any concerns on their part or questions, or perhaps they can think of like an edge case. So that'd be kind of next step. And then, in parallel, we can be thinking about, okay, well, how do we enforce this, right? So we want to make sure that as we roll out a fee change, that it doesn't have like some kind of unintended second order effect and impact. So the great thing, like Greg, who's a relatively new core developer, I think he joined at ZCon3 and a number of you met him, has done some great analysis work. So we could look at fees that are currently being paid and the shape of transactions, what those fees are, and then model it so that if we did increase fees to one thing or another, what would that look like? What would that impact be? We can now use that same kind of technology or the same, analysis to look at, okay, we've got wallet developers who have elected to start, adding this in as the standard fee. Nothing would, break if it's not included. So if, Addy, you and the Nighthawk team had it implemented first, but Edge or Unstoppable was behind, nothing is going to stop their transactions from working. But we can monitor kind of the adoption of this new fee schedule in the ecosystem and then look at, okay, we're comfortable that the percentage of transactions that are paying, fees according to the new mechanism are enough that as we begin to enforce it, it's not going to eliminate people from being able to transact, with Zcash. So first step would be, get it implemented by the devs. And second step would be then some selective enforcement. We're not looking at, and the quote enforcement is to be determined and for a lot of discussion. So we don't have any specific, we have some ideas, but not like hard, fast, this is what we think would be the best way. I mean, you can obviously look at, miners not including transactions that don't have the right fee structure. The relay of transactions, not relaying things that don't have the right fee structure, et cetera. So there's a number of things you can do, strictly before you would do like some kind of network upgrade, hard fork enforcement of the fee change. So I think we've got some options on the enforcement side, but a lot of it, again, to be determined and working with the different dev teams in the community on what that looks like. So probably a very long-winded answer to your question, but sorry about that.
But that's pretty good. That clarifies a lot of upcoming plans for this zip to be adopted. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, absolutely. Yeah, and great work. And thank you for authoring this. And again, I know you've been integrating quite heavily with the team, with Nate and Chris and Garrett and Strad and Chris on this. So yeah, great work to everyone, everyone involved. So yeah, so a question, question came in. Can you briefly explain the term sapling and orchard for a newbie? Yes. There are 4 pools of funds in Zcash. This is going to be super high level, so don't shoot me if there's anything like technically inaccurate here. So 4 pools of funds in Zcash. One is transparent. One is Sprout. That was the kind of the first, shielded technology introduced in Zcash. Another one is sapling. That was kind of the second shielded tech introduced in Zcash, which was, I believe, October 2018. And then Orchard is based on a new proof system called Halo 2, and that activated in May of this year. So there are 4 separate pools. So, just the names, we kind of followed a, just like we did for this call, an Arborist kind of theme. So Sprout, Sapling, Orchard kind of thing. Yeah, so it's essentially just a way to distinguish the different pools. And that they all they all use the sprout sapling and orchard transparent pools use different cryptography underlying, if you will. So hopefully that answered the question. Okay. All right, other questions before we move on? All right, so parameter analysis, and this is like taking, you know, kind of what we put out there, and this is a rough approximation, if you will. So if you look at like, you know, something with two logical actions, again, you know, logical actions from the parameter selection slide before. So basically just think of, you know, one thing in, one thing out. So, you know, kind of the simplest transaction, right? If you, the fee for that currently would be like, you know, or sorry, where is my column? I don't want to go through this ad nauseum, but yeah, if you did one of those in every single block, which is roughly 1152 per day based on a 75-second block time, you would have paid under the old mechanism of incredibly trivial amount of 69 cents, essentially. Now you'd pay $6.91, so more, but you're doing 1,100 transactions a day. So when you kind of keep it, that particular perspective in mind, it's not that bad, right? And then you can see here's a couple of other examples of, okay, I'm doing a 2 in, 2 out, or a 4 in, 4 out, right? And again, all the fees per day would have been, you know, again, assuming you do one every single block, you know, you can see the numbers there, right? Would have been 69 cents. Now it's, you know, $13, $27. The last column, you know, is obviously not a multiple of 2. Well, it is a multiple of 2, but it's not continuing on. This is the actual like average increased, you know, when we talk about increased shielded transaction load, at the time we pulled this, this was kind of representative of the load that we're seeing. Right? So each transaction on average for the given week that we looked at was about 1,100 logical actions. And there were about 704 of those per day. So not one in every block, but one in a number of blocks per day. The old fee for the transactions, or the current fee, would be 42 cents per day. Now that number would be like $2,300 per day. You know, this is essentially, you know, filling up blocks that the transactions occur in. So you're essentially getting the full use of the blockchain for these transactions. So again, a proportional fee mechanism would say you use more, you pay more, and that's what that would roll up to. So as you can tell, this would be, you know, about $12 a month roughly under the old fee mechanism, and it would be about $69,000 a month under the new mechanism. So again, you know, it's a pretty substantial load that we're seeing, and it's making heavy use of the chain, so it should definitely be proportional, you know, in our opinion. So any questions about any of that? I know it's a lot of numbers, and I kind of went through that fast, so happy to pause here and answer questions anyone might have. All right, and let's see, I think, yeah, that was all my prepared slides. So I'm going to actually get out of here, stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone a little bit better. And yeah, just kind of open it up to questions or anything else anyone wants to bring up. Dodger.
So there are some legitimate users who could want to create transactions with lots of actions, like exchanges,
right,
sweeping funds from deposit addresses, and miners doing mining payouts. How would this impact them?
Well, as I mentioned when I was talking, answering Addie's question, like, you know, next steps are, you know, meet with wallet devs and get the tires on it, but then also with exchanges and mining pools to go over the fee mechanism change with them, and then, you know, be able to see like what impact, or just make them aware of any potential impact to kind of their standard operations. But those are actually two cases that we were already thinking about, because sometimes I think the way exchanges work, people just assume, oh, I have a deposit address, I'll put 5 Zec in there, and like 5 Zec's always in there. But it's actually probably in there for about a minute, and then it gets swept to some address that's used for like proof of reserves, for example. So depending on how they operate and quite honestly the pattern of deposits and withdrawals, right, could involve like a lot of notes potentially, which would then have a more of an impact on fees. And ditto for mining pools, right? So a miner mines block, it's a block reward. They've got 100 participants in the pool. I mean, that could potentially be, in the simplest case, a 1 in, 100 out transaction. So that would, potentially change their model. So excellent question. And those are the type conversations we'll be having, over the coming weeks to make sure that that the change is well understood by ecosystem participants and they specifically understand how it might alter their operations a bit.
Yeah. So
let's see, Chris, I think maybe your hand was next. Yeah.
Yeah, I have just 2 comments there. One is that the initial plan for enforcement of this is through miner selection to prefer to select transactions that pay the ZIP 317 fees. But as far as miners are concerned for their own payouts, if they have, one of the things that they can do is include their own transactions, regardless of whether or not they pay that conventional fee. So for miners, I think this is, for mining pools specifically, I think this is perhaps less of a concern because mining pools never have to obey any particular fee structure because fees are not currently part of the consensus rules. The second thing is that I just wanted to point out that fees, even after this change, will remain extremely low. The per action fee is going to be something like 1/10 of a cent or lower at current prices. And so if an exchange has to spend 10 cents to sweep 100 deposits, I think that's compared to other chains, that's still extremely cheap. And the other thing about that is that I know from my own experience, for example, withdrawals from the exchanges that I've interacted with, they charge a withdrawal fee, and those fees are often, those fees, the most recent I paid was 0.001 Zec. So that's what something like 100 times the fee that the pool or that the exchange actually has to pay, even under the new rules. So fees remain extremely low, but if you're trying to fill every block, then it starts to add up.
That answers your question, Dodger.
So to add,
I think it would be interesting to have a tool that would where you could just give it a transaction ID and then it could tell you what the implied cost of that transaction would have been.
Yeah. I'm sure that's something Greg could add really quick.
Yeah, I mean that's actually
way more analysis. Yeah.
We have a tool that we ship with Zcashd, which is Zcash Inspect, and that already does dissection of transactions. It would be trivial to add the calculation of what the fee total under the new rules will be, and you can just give that. That actually works with the bytes of a transaction, but it would be straightforward to sort of chain that together with a script that can grab a transaction from the chain or something like that.
Yep. Okay. All right. Added that to our core team list to catch up on. But no, good idea. Addy.
Yeah, to add what Chris said, I mean, the whole purpose of the zip was to not let the fees grow a lot for end users who use Zcash regularly for sending and receiving Zac. This goes for exchanges as well. And the other point for exchanges and other services who might make large bundled transactions. In the past, like we have seen other blockchains, service providers adopt to the changing fees. So today, because of the low fees, they might just send large transactions. But if they do see that they are paying significant amounts of fees for sending transactions, they might change their way of operations. So I'm not too worried about exchanges as well.
All right. All right. Any other questions or comments? Or anything else anyone wants to discuss? We'll just open it up. All right. I think that definitely covered all the questions and comments in the chat. I don't think I missed anything there. So I guess we'll wrap up a little bit early, give folks some time back. So I know it's early for some and super late for others. So wherever you are, enjoy your day or your evening. And yeah, we'll catch up in Discord and see y'all in a couple of weeks on our next Arborist call.